Hey guys, welcome back to Outpost WFM, and I'm going to do a quick series breakdown on the Mars Outpost. This will be just a quick overview of what the podcast has been about, the different chapters that we went through, and the reasoning behind why everything was written in a fictional story the way it has. So to start off, we'll go through chapter 1, and the point of the first shuttle arriving safely is mainly to create an image about having a new group of agents that start on your floor. So you've got this group of new staff that are fresh in training. They've gone through the theoretical training sessions. They've learned the product and understood the product, and they're in a simulated environment while still in training. And now that they've actually reached the floor and they're live on the floor, we have different challenges that we face when we're in the live environment. In this case, the new Martians, as we call them, or the new hires that actually hit your floor in the contact center, experience challenges which the book tries to explain using the concept of being in the Mars environment and humans colonizing Mars. So, to start off in chapter 1, the first situation that was faced is something that we typically see in contact centers when new staff really, when they hit the floor and they're unsure about simple things such as seating arrangements, getting logged into the system properly, or following the correct process to get logged in, system challenges where they might be able to log into the system, but their accounts are not working properly, access with authority or permission levels on the system. There are a lot of challenges that take place when staff really do go live, even when it comes to taking that first call or dealing with that first interaction and that overwhelming feeling of being out of a training or simulated environment and now being in a live environment, and that mindset shift from being in control to being out of control. And what usually happens is that you need to have people, and we normally do that. We have people that are there on the job to help with the staff. You usually have training assistants and you have coaches and team leaders to assist, but that's assisting the people one on one. What happens from a perspective of the business holistically? So, workforce management in this case steps in to assist because we've catered for that new group of people to be on the floor contributing to our headcount that we need for that time. However, there are challenges that are faced where we have the people, but they're not in the right place, they're not focused on the right thing, they're just not able to log in or to get set up in order to be of use to the business. Chapter 1 goes through some of the solutions that the workforce team put in place and describes what real-time management would look like in that situation. So being able to be on the floor with the staff to guide them as to where to go, how to log in, what to do, as well as monitoring the vitals of the contact center, in that we have the staff available, but they may not be logged in at the time, or they may be in an org state. How is that impacting the business? Is it one interval that's been impacted? Is it two intervals? How long would we need to recover from those intervals? What contingencies do we put in place to get them into production as quick as possible so that there's as little risk to the business as possible? So in chapter 1, we talk about more real-time management of having new staff that hit the floor, new arrivals that just reached, and it goes through a bit of the contingencies about how a real-time team would be deployed in three aspects. It's understanding who's in the wrong place, it's attending to those who need assistance to get set up, and it's also keeping everybody informed of what the situation is. What is the impact of those staff not being logged in on time? What is the impact that the business is going to experience because of that? And how long is it going to take to resolve that impact? So really, chapter 1 focuses more on the real-time aspects of workforce management. So now in chapter 2 of the Mars Outpost, we go a bit further but keeping the same theme of having these new recruits on the floor. Once they are set up and they are able to assist on the phones and start their phone calls and the chats and the emails and servicing the clients in that way, there are different challenges that are faced. And a lot of these challenges now are more emotional, more human element challenges that would be faced, such as being overwhelmed by being in the live environment and maybe being in a situation whereby they joined at a time when it was busy and there are interactions back to back, which was not really practiced in the same way in the simulated environment or in the training room. And in the training room, you'd usually have a session whereby you'd train a consultant or run through an interaction and then pause and then go through the steps of what was done right, what was done wrong. But in a live environment, you don't have that opportunity. And with a new person joining, there will be an overwhelming sense that they would experience or an overwhelming feeling that they would get by being new in the environment, being new in the business, and not having enough confidence to handle those interactions as they would in the simulated environment. Chapter 2 talks about how the WFM team starts assessing the progress of the new recruits and understanding what those challenges are. So in chapter 2, we talk about how some of the Martians who had better physical attributes on Earth struggled with physical attributes when they reached their new environment. And that's similar to what we see in the contact centers. We might have agents that really excel in the training room, but don't achieve that same level of excellence once they're on the floor. And it's not a case of they lack the skill because they've shown that skill in the training room. It's more of a situation of the environment that has changed, which has caused a different response or reaction, a different behavior in the environment that they're in. In this case, when a situation like that occurs, the WFM team needs to be able to start shuffling their resources around to understand how to get the best out of them or still use the resource, but be able to make a real time decision to know that this agent is struggling speaking to customers on the phone because it is a bit overwhelming, but they do have the knowledge and the skill to be able to handle emails. So even though that's a new recruit, it would make sense in that moment to swap them over to an email channel just so that they can continue working but have a better chance at settling into their new environment. And chapter 2 goes into a lot of the details about WFM analytics being present in every step of the journey from training before the agents go live onto the floor to the process of the agents being placed on the floor and afterwards monitoring the first few days or weeks of the agents being on the floor to understand from an analytical standpoint these new resources that are available to them. How are we as a WFM team going to get the full productivity that we need out of them and the full benefit that we can get out of them now that we've been given these resources? How do we shift them around? How do we shuffle them around? And the only way we can do that is by understanding what type of resource do we have, what are their skills, and where best can we use them on areas of the business where we need those specific skills. When we get to chapter 3, it changes a little bit. So you notice a bit of a transition in the storyline whereby it's not directly related to a typical WFM experience that you'd see from cradle to grave when you in a contact center. And that's because of the build of the story and the way the storyline has been structured. In this case, the storyline has been structured in a way whereby it's set on an entirely different planet and everything has to be built up from scratch. Chapter 3 brings in metrics and KPIs and targets that the team implemented in order to build structure in the colony that they were creating. But how would that relate in a real life situation? So in chapter 3 we speak about full-time equivalents, average handle time, and occupancy being the three main points of chapter 3. But we speak about that in the context of creating some sort of structure for the colony that's relatable to what they were trying to achieve when they got to Mars and trying to colonize Mars. The FTE metric, even though it stands for full-time equivalent and it relates to the amount of work, it is structured and explained in a way for the Martians to understand what is needed in order to get the production done, in order to produce the results that's needed. So the chapter talks about FTEs in the sense of it being a measure of time, but represented in units of people. So, for example, one person would be one full-time equivalent, but it's equivalent to what? And that to what is basically an amount of hours or intervals or work that needs to be done. So, for example, if I need 1 hour of work to be done at the mines on Mars to do the iron mining, or if I needed 1 hour of work to be done at the farming site, that would then equate back to the number of FTE or full-time equivalent. So we'd work out how much staff do we need to get the task done. Usually when we relate this back into hours, and when we talk about contact center demand, we take about, as an example, let's just say we'll take 20 calls for the hour. So in that 1 hour, based on 20 calls that are coming in at 5 minutes per call, how many people would I need to handle or to answer those 20 calls and to stay on those 20 calls for 5 minutes each? A full-time equivalent represents just that. In the chapter, we go through an example about the iron mining site and the farming site, and I'll run through that again. It's a very simple example to explain the concept, to say that at the iron mining site we needed 12 FTE to do the amount of work that we needed. Those 12 people would have produced or mined enough iron that we could have, in that amount of time that we were given, to meet the demand for the entire project. So if every day we had 12 people mining for 3 hours a day, we'd know that in a month's time we'd have enough iron that has been mined for us to build the next section of the base on Mars. So a very far out example, but a very relatable example, in that an FTE is not just representing a person that is employed by the company. FTE represents the number of people that's needed to fulfill a task. So chapter 3 talks about how FTE relates to the colony, and it goes into an explanation to the colony that's growing for them to understand why that's important to the colony and why that's important to the base, so that they understand what's needed of them. Why do they need to be there? And what is the purpose and what is the goal that they are working towards? Similarly, in a call center, the agents need to understand that the goal that we are working towards is not just to meet service level. It's not just to meet turnaround time on chats or emails, but it's to meet the demand so that the business can benefit from maintaining a good customer experience at the end of the day. So it's not just a case of we need people on the phone, we need FTE, or we are understaffed by 2 or 3 people. When those conversations end at that point with we need more FTE, or we don't have enough FTE, or we don't have enough staffing, if a conversation ends at that point, that conversation is not over. There has to be a bit more explanation as to what is the impact of not having that FTE, or what is the impact of having the incorrect amount of FTE at a certain place in the business compared to other places that need it, because the impacts of it is what should be discussed, not what you have at the moment, but what is the impact of what you have at the moment. We'll also go on in chapter 3 about average handle time and occupancy, and these again are metrics that are something that we are all used to. And the handle time was also described in the chapter to explain to the new Mars residents about how long it'll take to complete a task. So if they're mining, for example, and to cut through a specific size rock, it would take typically an hour to do so. That's how it has been positioned to the Martians, to explain to them that this usually takes an hour to get through this piece of work. If it takes longer than an hour, or if it takes less than an hour, we need to understand why. Because if it's longer than an hour, we might be working with materials that have not been baselined properly, which means that our entire plan has to change. It means that our number of people that we have on Mars are not enough to get the next part of the base built. Similarly, in a call center, if that AHT is not realistic, we'll always be in a case of receiving back-to-back calls because we wouldn't be able to clear the queue on time, and we'll always be in a situation whereby we cannot give out off-phone activities or have any opportunity for staff to be a bit flexible on their work hours, only because the AHTs should serve as a baseline of how long it takes to complete a task, and not a case of did we meet handle time or not. There's always a situation whereby you'll have a baseline and there will be an upper and lower bound to that baseline. And the HT, while needing to be on baseline, can fluctuate up or down depending on the situation. And to give you a real life example, let's consider a company that is required to send out communication to their entire customer base. Let's say that this is some sort of financial institution that is, it's a bank, for example, and they are increasing their interest rates. They are required by law to inform all the customers. So the email or the letter or the text goes out, or a message on the app, and all the customers are informed of this. But you will have an amount of customers that would want to contact the business and get more information about how that's going to impact them. Your HT baseline cannot remain the same in a situation like that. That is why you should have upper and lower bounds on your AHT. We have to understand that in an event like that, we expect the AHT to be higher. We expect the questions that are being asked to be out of the norm and to take longer to assist, because people who are using the banking services need to understand how it's going to impact their personal lives. On the other end of the scale, if the AHT is too low, there are two things to consider: whether it's call avoidance, or whether that there is a situation whereby we have become more efficient in the way we handle things, or a new process has been put in place, like a self-service option, that's reduced the need for somebody to speak to a consultant. And therefore, you'll have different scenarios whereby your baseline must have an upper and lower limit and cannot always be on target every single time. And then the last thing on occupancy. So when we talk about FTE and AHT, we then talk about occupancy, because that is basically the busyness metric of a person. How busy are they with the piece of work that they're doing in the amount of time that they're given? So in this case, we're talking about a person that has a task to do, and they are given an hour to complete the task, and they're occupied, busy with the task, but they get the task done in 45 minutes. So you're sitting with an occupancy of 75% for that hour because the person was only busy for 75% of that hour. In that case, occupancy becomes a measure of how busy were you with the tasks that were available to you in the time that you were working. This is important in planning because we got to understand if we are using our resources effectively, if we are using them efficiently, if we are using the resources where we need them, and if there's opportunity to use those resources on multiple campaigns in those times, like overflow or on different skill sets. For example, a sales agent might have the same ability to work on a retention queue whereby it's a similar skill. You want to make a sale and you're trying to convince the customer to purchase your product or your service. And then on the retention side, you're trying to convince the customer to keep your product or service. In that case, your occupancy could come in and you could match sales and retentions and leverage the skill set between the two and reduce the overall FTE that you would need by using the different handle times and aligning them to the demand that your customer has. So, chapter 3 goes into a bit of technical discussions about what we needed to do on Mars and how we had to explain this to the colony so that they were able to get up to speed with how things need to run and why we track certain things the way we do to prevent any wastage. And the reason why we've chosen the setting of Mars is that being on a planet that's not designed or not suited for humans, any wastage or any mistake could be life threatening. And while it might seem like a very extreme example, it really is relatable in the sense that in the real world, when you're sitting with a situation whereby there's a wasted resource or there's wastage of resources in your business, it has a financial impact on your business. And understanding where that's coming from should be the first thing that you do. It's the process, it's the structure, it's the framework that was built. That's what we need to go and look for and make sure that those things are in line before we start fixing and adjusting or even talking about how much was wasted. We've got to make sure that the structure has been set up correctly. Chapters 4 and 5 go into a bit of detail that's more focused on the operational aspect of the contact center agents that are working in your business. It's about the conversations that they have, about the learnings that they share amongst themselves, and the advice that they give each other. Because in this type of industry and in this type of business, we have people that would share tips and tricks and would share experiences with each other about how they've got the job done. A situation would come up whereby agent number one explains to agent number two that they were able to reduce the handle time by skipping a few steps in the process only because those steps were just disclaimers that they had to read out, and because they've memorized it, they didn't have to read through it. And while they were moving on to the next part of the system and filling in details in the next part of the system, they were just reading the disclaimer from memory. Now, these habits and behaviors, this is what we'd call human nature, but it's not always a good thing. And in terms of management of people, chapters 4 and 5 go into a bit of detail about being able to identify these and to try and put in some guidance in place for that. Because some of these conversations may be good in that agents are sharing knowledge between each other, but it has to be guided by a senior so that the good habits are shared and the bad habits are identified and explained and dealt with relative to why they are bad habit or why it should not be done and what is the impact to the business if that had to continue happening. In chapter 4 we talk about how some of the bad habits resulted in a loss of food provisions, and that's relatable because in the real world, if a bad habit or if something negative had to happen because of a shortcut that an agent took, caused a financial loss to the company, that is going to be a situation whereby an agent would face disciplinary action because of the advice that he's taken from a colleague. So in chapter 4, we talk about how the workforce management analytics and reporting assists in those cases, whereby those stats that are done on an agent level can compare agents' performance side by side to understand who's close to the baseline and who's far off from the baseline. And that's what the workforce analytics team need to show to operations. We need to show them in a report, where do the challenges lie? Where are those bumps in the road? And then it becomes a management conversation about identifying the agents and the teams that are associated with those challenges or those hiccups that we have, and then doing a root cause to find out, is it because of poor training? Is it because of taking shortcuts? Is it because of human behavior that's causing it? And those WFM analytics on agent performance stats is what we need to identify these things. And further in chapter 5, the shrinkage concept is brought in because in the event of a training need being identified, we'd need to take agents off the phone or out of production in order to get them trained up. So we've created a problem for ourselves whereby we've allowed conversations to take place where staff would share bad behaviors amongst themselves or shortcuts amongst themselves. And now we'd need to create more time or to take people off the phones and create time for that in order to reteach them the correct way of doing things. And the shrinkage concept also covers other aspects such as absenteeism, late coming, breaks, and so on. But it's also important to note that from a business leader or a CEO level, when we go to them and say that you need to cater for 36% shrinkage in your business, that leader is going to look at the number 36% and he's going to ask the question, I need to hire 36% more staff than I need only because I need to reteach them what I've taught them already in the training session. And the first question is going to be, why do I need to reteach them this? And the situation comes down to the behavior on the contact center floor and the habits on the contact center floor that weren't addressed in real time, that weren't picked up in real time, either due to a reporting that was available, or even if the reporting was available, a lack of intervention using the reports that were available at the time. All of us, as WFM professionals, as team managers, as contact center managers, we need to look at shrinkage in the concept of this question. Do we need to hire 30 or 40% more staff than we need only because we've got to constantly teach them and train them to do what we've already taught them and trained them to do when we hired them? And that question should guide the conversations about how effective the training methods are, or how effective the coaching sessions are, or how good the hiring process is. It doesn't stop at the fact that we are understaffed or we don't have enough people. If we don't have enough people only because we've got to keep taking them off the phones to get trained or to get coached, then the question becomes, is the coaching effective? Is the training effective? Or is it that the type of person that we are recruiting not a good fit for the contact center? And that's where the root cause is, and that's where we should start asking the questions. So chapters 4 and 5 will go together in the sense of addressing behavioral issues in conjunction with how those behavioral people issues impact the shrinkage that businesses use to plan for when working out how much staff that they need. All right, so now as we close off into chapter 6, into the final chapter of the storyline about colonizing Mars and how workforce management was involved with the colonization, the planning, and all the challenges that they faced. Chapter 6 goes through the WFM cycle and really talks about the process of everything that's happened so far and goes through a bit of advice about what they've done in order to get things working that the way they needed it to work, but also how they've approached the situation and how they've been able to adapt to the situation. In most businesses, being agile and being able to adapt and problem solve is a skill that is unique to people's characters. It's not a it's a situation or it's a skill whereby a person would need to assess what's going on right now and at the same time do two things. Try and problem solve and figure out how to fix the situation that's going on, that's unfolding at this time, and at the same time planning out how to prevent this from happening again. Now, typically, we have a very well known and documented process called the continuous improvement cycle that would use, and most businesses would use that in any case. It doesn't have to be in workforce management. In chapter 6, we go through a WFM cycle, which is very similar to the continuous improvement cycle in the way that it's designed, because it is looking at what we've forecasted and what we've planned for when we've arrived on the planet. And let's relate that back to the contact center. You've got your new training group and you've got your plan in place. You've expected certain things to happen. You've forecasted certain things to go a certain way, and you've planned for it. So you've got your schedule in place. You know at a certain date, a certain amount of people are going to come through. And once that's done, you go into your monitoring phase and you start monitoring how your forecast and your schedule is playing out. It's being executed on the floor, but as WFM, you gotta watch and keep an eye on how the execution is taking place to pick up problems in that plan or that forecast and to highlight those problems, to record it, tag it, highlight it, and understand what categories those fall under. And the whole process that was followed from chapter 1 to chapter 6 and all the challenges that have been faced is really just an account of everything that could have went wrong, but more importantly, how did we react to these problems? How did we respond to them? What were our contingencies? And in many cases, we may not have contingencies for everything. There would be cases where we would have to come up with a contingency on the spot. And how agile are we to create a contingency on the spot so that in the event something similar happens in the future, you have 100% confidence in a contingency plan that's aligned to that specific problem. And that's what happens in chapter 6. It goes through all the contingencies, it talks about the cycle, it talks about every challenge that's been faced, and then Outpost WFM talks about putting all of those things together into the planning and adjusting the entire forecast, schedule, and the entire WFM plan for the next arrival or the next group of Martians that are going to arrive. And in the real world, it'll be WFM should have a plan in place to show here's your first batch of new recruits that hit the floor. This is a report of all the challenges we faced when that new arrival hit the floor for the first time. Here are all the contingencies for things that are out of our control, that should they happen, we know what to deploy, and here's a revised plan of what we should be doing when the second group hits the floor. It's a more optimized plan, it's a more streamlined plan because we now know what to expect when situations occur after reviewing what happened during the first intake. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed the series and I hope you guys found it entertaining and insightful. So stay tuned. Thank you guys for listening in. Catch you in the next one.